In all our process-based management activities, we need to remember that the purpose of process is performance. That's not just a nicely alliterative phrase, it's fundamental. The purpose of process is performance. So of course, we need to measure process performance. We need process KPIs. The idea of creating a set of KPIs for a cross-functional process might fill you with dread, but it doesn't have to be difficult. To make process KPI discovery efficient and effective, let's take our own advice and improve the process, define process KPIs. What should a process KPI look like? We don't want too many rules, but there are some things that should be there and some that should not. In this video, I want to have a closer look at the anatomy of a process KPI. Quick bit of revision. You might recognize this diagram. It's the 7 enablers of BPM, and there's another whole video about that. Perhaps you'd like to have a look at that if you haven't already. And the second, as we usually list them, of the enablers is process measurement. Fundamentally important that we are able to properly measure process performance, because if we're not measuring process performance, I don't think we're managing it, and we wouldn't have a clue whether we're improving performance. So it's fundamental that we're able to do it correctly. And a big step in getting along the way to having good process performance measurement is to have the right KPIs properly defined. So here's the process performance question. When I'm working with organizations around the world and we're looking at process performance issues, defining KPIs, this is the question that comes up all of the time. This is the process performance question. If the key stakeholders were happy with the performance of the process, what would be happening and how would we know? It sounds like a simple question, and often the answer is pretty simple, but it can be quite complex too, because we'll have multiple stakeholders, multiple demands, etc. But this is always the question we're trying to answer, the process performance question. The key stakeholders were happy with the performance of the process. How would we know, and what would be happening? We need to be as specific about that as possible. And the first place to do that is to start with our definition of what we mean by a process KPI. Now, as I say, I don't want to have too many hard rules about this, but I think there are some things we should usefully include. So we'll talk about them here briefly, and I'll show an example in a moment. But it has these 4 kind of components, I think. There's something that we're measuring, the thing, the unit of measure, and then the thing that we're measuring itself, the item, and often that's out of some population, some larger group perhaps, and perhaps there's some issue about timing. I think these are quite important characteristics for us to include in our process KPI definition. So here's an example. Taking this process recruit employee, let's assume this starts from when we start to define the role and to advertise. We collect applicants, we interview, and we make offers, and an offer is accepted. So it's everything from definition through to acceptance, if you like. And here's our KPI, as we've stated it here, the percentage of first offers accepted from all offers per month. By the way, I think that's a wonderful example of a great cross-functional KPI. Because it tells you everything, isn't it? We go through all the trouble of advertising and interviewing and selecting, and we make an offer, and presumably that's the very best person and we're excited. We want that person on board. How often does she accept? Is it 95% of the time, 98% of the time? That's what we'd like, isn't it? If it's 60% of the time, it means way too often we're going down our list and we're getting acceptance from second or third choice. Anyway, I digress, but wonderful KPI. So let's have a look at the structure and just map it back onto the 4 characteristics that I was talking about before. So the unit, we're measuring a percentage. What are we measuring? We're measuring first offers accepted. It's very specific. And we're measuring here, in this case, from all offers. So it's the percentage of those accepted of all offers. Now, we could have measured something different. We could have measured this by different demographics or different roles or whatever. But for this particular KPI, we're measuring out of all offers, and we're doing it per month. Again, it could have been per quarter or per year or per week or whatever we might want to do. But we're quite specific here about the timing. So I think this kind of definition then will allow us to have clear KPIs. We can collect the right data and there's no ambiguity about it. So unit, item, population and timing, percentage of first offers accepted from all the offers per month. So I think if we think about our KPIs like that and drill down and get a bit better a definition, I think it's going to be easier to use them, easier to collect good data about which we're not going to have any complaints. The easy thing to do is to say, here's a good KPI. What about first offers accepted? And you often see that, something like that will get written. The KPI definition is first offers accepted. Okay, but that's more a theme than a KPI, I think. So it's worth just drilling down and getting the detail. The words are important. This is a definition, and we want the best definition we can that's not going to be ambiguous and that people will understand and use in the same way. Now, here's some things that we don't want to have in our process KPI, or any KPI for that matter, but we don't want aspirations. So, we don't want any of this be the best sort of thing, or even be second best. That's not a KPI. That's some kind of vague aspiration. We don't want any targets built into the KPI. We will have targets for our KPI, of course, but we don't want to build them into the KPI definition. So we're not going to say, our KPI is to have customer satisfaction greater than 90%. We don't want to build in that target into the KPI because we might want to adjust the KPIs separate to changing the target and vice versa. We don't want to include improvement suggestions or solutions in there. So I wouldn't like a KPI that said 60% of the tasks are going to be automated. That's a kind of project rather than a KPI, isn't it? It might be an important way to improve the performance of the process, but the KPI is going to be, perhaps it's about, the elapsed time to execute the process, and one way to reduce that is automation, obviously, but I don't think automation itself is a KPI. And we don't want any fuzziness, any fuzzy, unclear language, and we're all good at doing this if we're not careful. So we don't want to be, having a KPI about having a process that's more efficient or more effective, or, something that's hard to measure. And sometimes that feels a bit better because it's also hard to get wrong, but we really do want KPIs for which we can have targets that would have quantitative objective measures, something that we can really use to understand the performance of the process. So we don't want any of those. We want well-defined KPIs. And if we can get all of that, then it takes us to, my famous phrase, proven valued business benefits. That's what it's all about, isn't it? There's another whole video on PVBB. Have a look at it if you haven't already. So the tool that we're going to use, one of the tools that we're going to use to get to proven valued business benefits, particularly the proven bit perhaps, is a properly structured KPI that we can then go on and set good targets against. We can collect the right data. We can have sensible conversations about it and about what to do if we're not happy with the performance, and that we can go on and improve the performance of the process and thereby improve the performance of the organisation. Takes us back to proven valued business benefits, and that's the business we're in as process practitioners.